Has the nature of issue changed when developing products now comparing to back then, let's say 10, 15 years ago in the AEC industry?
The biggest change is that are getting shorter and shorter.
And how does the week of the chief product officer look like, apart from this 25% spent on the talking to customers?
Well, a lot of the rest of the week is working with the team. Just because you hear like a consistent idea from customers doesn't mean that's necessarily.
Is there any advice you could give to someone who is raising money and choosing between different VCs? What was your approach when?
The first thing you want to do is make the simplest freaking thing you can, even if it is just an interactive to hand to a prospect, someone you think is going to be your future customer, and see if they like it.
How does Hypar ensure accuracy and reliability when converting text descriptions into BIM models? How do you relate to that?
So, how do you guarantee accuracy? Well, it is in fact an exercise to decide whether something is accurate in the right way.
Text to BIM. Is it possible? And how will generative AI disrupt the design process? You're listening to Bricks and Bytes, and on this episode, we welcome Anthony Hauck, Chief Product Officer at Hypar. In this episode, we discuss how Hypar raised $5.5 million to fuel the development of targeted applications for the AEC industry. Anthony shares his key advice for entrepreneurs: thoroughly validate your idea before investing in software development. We dive into the limitations of current BIM systems and explore how Hypar enables task-specific applications. Finally, we look at how generative AI can help capture expertise and shorten learning curves for AEC professionals. If you're enjoying our podcast, you can support us by heading over to www.bricksbytes.show and signing up to our newsletter. This is an easy and free way which helps us keep the podcast going. In addition, you'll receive all of the key insights from the guests we have on, as well as some bonus content about what's going on in the wider world of construction tech. And now, an announcement from our sponsor, Shift. Worry you'll lag behind because construction is going digital and you struggle with all things tech? You need the right BIM partner to help. That's why this episode is brought to you by Shift, BIM specialists for contractors who want to thrive and stay competitive in construction's digital future. Visit maketheshft.digital for more information.
Anthony, welcome. So today we're going to talk to you about generative design. So you have spent 12 years as an IT director in architectural engineering firm, then a decade in Autodesk as a director of product strategy. Then you went on to your own consulting on advanced computational technologies. Now you are CEO of Hypar. So can you talk us through how you ended up creating world's first cloud-based design automation platform?
Well, first, I'm now the Chief Product Officer for Hypar.
Okay.
And we can talk more about that. It's an interesting journey. I was, originally one of the first people in a firm I worked for in New York called Escadar Freeburg to try out this new AutoCAD thing that they were doing. So I date back to AutoCAD 2.6, which was the first one with snapping. And, back then I found I had an affinity for it. And when I was living in Los Angeles, I had my own consultancy, and I worked with another consultant to bring CAD into a particular firm. And eventually I sort of hit the limits on how fast I could make AutoCAD even with all the optimizations that my fellow consultant had figured out. And that's when I started programming computers, because I realized there was a whole programming language underneath AutoCAD that you could then write macros in there and make things go faster and faster. And so that was how I actually started getting into more the technology side rather than the design side. And eventually, when I joined EYP in 1995 back on the East Coast, I actually chose the firm because I thought they were big enough to support moving from architecture into technology, and that did turn out to be the case. And I started out writing custom software for them on top of AutoCAD, and eventually I was running the IT department for them, which has very different concerns from actually producing your own software. And eventually in IT you start hearing the same problems over and over again, and I got bored, and that's when I joined Autodesk on the Revit team. And went into product management, which frankly I didn't even know was a thing that one did. I didn't actually know that was a job. But I really had a blast doing it. At first I was a product manager for Revit, then I was a senior product manager, then a director of product management, and then finally in my last 2 years at Autodesk, I've been thinking a lot about, for literally decades at that point, like how does computation, intersect with building design and construction. And I had a bunch of ideas that I proposed for implementation in Autodesk back in 2012. And it just, everyone seemed to think that was a great idea and nobody wanted to do anything with it for a while. And then there was this company called Flux, and shout out to Jen Carlisle, who did a presentation about something they referred to as the building seed, which was something that would grow like onto a tree from a seed according to all the different parameters and goals that the building was trying to achieve. So I trotted that back to Autodesk management, and I said, hey, look at this. We ought to do this. Remember what I proposed back when? What do you think about if there are all these automated factories that you posit producing buildings? If somebody hooked it up with a generative system, would anybody actually need construction documents, which is where we make all our money? Maybe we should get ahead of this. So I started this group called the AEC Generative Design Group at Autodesk, and my first phone call internally was to my current partner, Ian Keogh, who invented Dynamo back when, and had come in to Autodesk with the Vela acquisition. And I said, hey, I'm doing this generative design thing, and I'd really like to have you on the team. And we started talking and realized we had this very similar ambition about some sort of platform where lots of people could contribute different aspects of building expertise that would be combinable into applications. And when Autodesk eventually was not terribly interested in going in that direction, Ian and I separately left Autodesk and then kind of got back together and questioned each other as to whether we still wanted to do something like that. And so Hypar was born.
Okay. Brilliant. So let me touch on a few things because you mentioned so much here. So I want to touch on why Autodesk was not interested in developing this type of applications. My thesis on large companies is that, like once Vinod Khosla said, that nothing interesting happens in a solid core. So once the company grows to a certain stage, they don't want to innovate too much because they are happy with their revenues, etc., etc. But I would like to get your thoughts on this. Also, go on.
Well, I would just say, it's not about, it's not so much about like not being interested in any particular thing as more as not being interested at a particular time. So, at the time, Autodesk, was really trying to get into construction, and it was sort of difficult to get traction on a story around, everything needs some sort of generative approach. Things like construction schedules or construction methodologies in the field can benefit from these sort of automated ideas. And it just wasn't where a lot of the needs of the company were at the time. So I wouldn't tag Autodesk with necessarily like they don't want to innovate, because there's tons of super smart and innovative people in the company. But it doesn't matter how big a company is, whether it's as small as Hypar or as large as Autodesk or IBM, resources are still finite, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're making, strategic moves in the market, you have to decide what you're going to invest in and what you're going to defer investing in. And we do it too. So, there's a larger kind of macro business environment in which everybody functions. And, I wouldn't lay it at the door of, a company's philosophy or attitude. It's more about business decisions that you make at the time. And, honestly, it was a business decision because, I wanted to pursue this and Ian wanted to pursue it. That we decided not to work with Autodesk further because we thought we could do something interesting on our own on a different timetable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. So maybe one more question about the past and when you working in Autodesk as a product management.
Yeah.
What type of has the nature of issue changed when developing products now comparing to back then, let's say 10, 15 years ago in the AEC industry?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I actually had, I was part of some of the change that's happened already. In the arc of Autodesk, long before I joined Autodesk, for example, AutoCAD would kind of come out whenever it was done. So it could be a year, it could be 2.5 years between releases of AutoCAD. And of course, when you're a publicly traded company, nobody's very interested in the sort of, uneven spikes of revenue. They want everything to kind of be a little more steady and dependable. Mm-hmm. So that drives you toward first annual releases, right? Mm-hmm. Things like subscription and that sort of thing. But also you go from this cadence of, it'll ship when it's done to it's going to ship on a day. So what is reasonable to include in a shipping product at that time? And again, it's this resource trade-off about what should be included. And look, I count as some of my largest successes as a product manager in deciding not to ship something that was not ready. Mm-hmm. And, at one point for one particular major feature of Revit, there was a team that had worked on it for 2 years, and I made the call that we were not going to ship it. And it turned out to be the right call because it turned out when we did ship it, the following yearly release, it was really, really rock solid. And so sometimes the best decision you can make is not shipping something. Now, the biggest change is that shipping cycles are getting shorter and shorter. Like when you're a SaaS company like we are, we actually, the product is getting updated once or twice a week in various aspects, right? Now, very difficult, near to impossible to do on a desktop product, and especially not dependably, because, you have to kind of count on people to say, yes, I want the update now, right? And so I would say the big difference is accelerated release cycles. So, major pieces of software, Autodesk and beyond, like come out quarterly onto your desktop, right? But the big change, of course, is SaaS software where, you are releasing continuously. And so that gives you so many more opportunities as a product manager, because you can do things at very low cost that would be nearly impossible to do with a desktop. In other words, things like A/B tests, like let's have some users try the feature with this flavor, and let's have some users try the feature with this other flavor, and whatever seems to work better, that's what you can release, to the whole constituency. So I think this capability as kind of business moves to SaaS products is on the side of the product producer, that the difference in product management is your feedback loop is extremely tight. extremely informative because of all the logging that you can keep track of, which is basically impossible to do on a desktop. And so the fund of knowledge that comes back at you to make decisions is a lot bigger. And then you have a different challenge, right? Which is, how do you manage all that information, and how do you find the signal inside of the noise that makes sense? And like any sociological study, and in product management, a lot of times is a sociological study, you have to do two things. You do quantitative data gathering, and you do qualitative interviews, because data will tell you what people did. You can very rarely pull out why people did that thing, and so you have to ask, like I do, right now I spend probably at least a quarter of my week in talking with users and having them test software live. And a lot of that is hearing them think aloud and asking them questions about, like, what were you thinking when you did that? What were you trying to do? Why were you trying to do it? Etc. And that's when you marry up, what people are doing with questions about why they're doing it, then you really get actionable information. And that is very, very difficult to do in a desktop environment. Autodesk has done it in the past with things like gathering a bunch of users 4 months before release and paying them to test the product for a week, and then being able to do all those interviews. But at that point, you're about to release the product, and you're looking for bugs. You're not looking for necessarily actionable feature suggestions.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So when you said you spent a quarter of your week talking to customers and trying to figure out their incentives behind doing some things within the software, how does a week of the chief product officer look like, apart from this 25% spent on talking to customers?
A lot of the rest of the week is working with the team, because just because you hear like a consistent idea from customers doesn't mean that's necessarily immediately actionable, right? Because they could be asking for something which is so far down in the substrate to change that it might be a fine idea. It might not make sense to do it right now, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion with the engineering team. There's a lot of design sessions. There's a lot of testing internally. I just got tagged by an engineer this morning. He said, I'm changing this particular feature, and I'd really like you to, try it out this afternoon, because it turns out I have an uncanny ability to find exactly where the software will break. So now the engineers like to run past me to see if I can break what their work is. So there's time on that, and there's time in working with customers kind of from an account management perspective. They're existing customers and they have ambitions, and you'll see how much you can support them and when. And then a lot of, strategic, document writing about, we need this sort of thing, and this is kind of how it should probably work. This is the stage it's at in running these ideas past prospective users and all that. But, the team is on a really nice cadence now, where we have, anywhere from 8 to 12, customer interviews a week, where they're, trying new things. And, we have such a good team. They're so good at responding to those kind of, that kind of feedback from customers, that it's like every week I get to try something new, with another batch of customers to see how it goes over. And the interesting things we've been doing lately too is, as we start standing up a new application, on top of the Hypar platform, we actually are putting in features, and occasionally we have removed them again. And it's because we just see people use it and realize that, wow, that is an incredibly tedious way to do that. And when you'll see a user do something and they'll do something tedious and they don't complain, and you think, oh, that's what they're doing every day anyway. That's why they're not complaining. And then we go, okay, well, maybe we should back that out and then think about how do we make that kind of task fun? And that's been a lot of our focus lately. Hypar has a huge amount of capabilities, but consistent feedback we've gotten is, love Hypar, a little hard to teach and learn. And so, we're taking a fairly radical approach in simplifying Hypar's presentation for particular tasks so that it is fun. When it's not, we want to try to make it as much as possible, as much as possible, it's fun rather than work, because, what is the saying? Like, if you love your job, you'll never work another day in your life, So,
yeah, that's right. But with software, especially for AEC industry, for our industry, I find that it takes a long time for a professional to learn how to use it efficiently. So they need to put in these 10,000 hours to become a very good specialist. And then once it happens, then they are kind of working well on a software. That's what, in my view, that's one of the challenges of BIM technology, broadly speaking. So, what does Hypar provide that BIM has been missing in the last kind of decade or so?
Well, it's good to understand where BIM is coming from, to understand where we thought there was a need, because ultimately the way the idea of building information modeling has been implemented in several companies, let us say, it's not actually about modeling a building as much as it is arranging the source material for a set of coordinated construction documents, right? And those are actually different things because if you were modeling a building as your first idea, right, you would actually worry a lot less about how the documents come out and a lot more about, let's say, coordination of building systems would be a fine endeavor that one would look at. But partially due to people like me who were in, professional life at the time when a company called Charles River Software and later Revit Technologies, came to us and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this new piece of software, for architects. What do you think it should do? And, jerks like me would say stuff like, well, until it can do this 500-page document set, I don't even want to talk to you. And so, of course, what do you do when you hear that from customers over and over again? Because they did, you go and make something that's really good at making 500-sheet document sets.
Yeah.
Right? And so the idea around we're going to have a model of the building, and dare I say digital twin of a building, I think is somewhat misguided, because a full twin is actually probably not as useful as a targeted representation of what you need for something you want to do, right? So the kind of structure of our industry, unless you're doing design build, right, is that there are a bunch of different legal entities that are all trading information back and forth under contract, right? And their mandate in those contracts is to not do somebody else's work, not just because you shouldn't be doing other people's work that you're not getting paid for, but you shouldn't be doing work for which you'll be liable that you don't understand. So that limits to a degree like a universal model to begin with. Secondly, again, these models are built for documentation purposes, not for construction purposes and not for maintenance purposes. And those are very, very different tasks for which you need very different types of information to be available. So I have a friend, shout out to Kelly Cohn, who was, when people started talking about digital twins, he would start jokingly talking about, digital octuplets, right? And the thing is, you may need a model of a plumbing system, but you do not need the model of every single other system and wall and door and everything in the building at that moment. You need some subset of information to work with. And often that is better encapsulated in some targeted representation. Now, with what we're doing with Hypar is we're looking at all the things that BIM is bad at, which is basically everything but doing coordinated construction documents, right? So right now, this year, kind of from mid-year in 2023 to now and going forward, largely pulled by a bunch of customers, we've been concentrating very deeply on space planning. And what we have discovered in talking with many customers who have this task is they're using some tool to do it. And whatever tool they're using, Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, Bluebeam, PowerPoint, Excel, they are in some way misusing that tool to get their task done because none of those tools were designed to do space planning, right? You could pick any task, like running, figuring out pipe pressures or designing sprinkler systems. And I'm not saying you can't do it in those pieces of software, because people do it every day.
Yeah.
Well, the software itself is not designed as software to support any of those tasks. It's designed to support a bunch of generalized tasks that you can force into conforming to what you need. But that's the thing. You're asking it to do something that it was only perhaps on a good day, half to 3/4 designed for. Right. And so what we envisioned with Hypar was not only that perhaps we would make tools as we are for certain tasks, but that anybody could come along to the platform competent in certain types of programming and create the thing they wanted that was really super suited to their task. So, for example, we've done custom work for a firm called AliAxis, headquartered out of Belgium. They're multinational. They do various types of piping, and they deliver certain types of systems. We work with them for a couple of years, and they have an extremely customized version of doing siphonic drainage systems for large flat roofs, and it does everything for them that no other piece of software will do.
And they're using Hypar to do that.
And they're using Hypar, yes. And now these days they have their own development team, and they continue to develop the product that they use internally. That piece of software is designed to do a very particular building system down to every single part and piece that they manufacture in there. And that really works for them. Who it doesn't work for is pretty much anybody else, unless they're building an AliAxis system, right? And so, but there's no real way to build things like that easily on existing pieces of software out there. And we designed Hypar from the ground up to make as many of those targeted applications easily possible as we possibly could.
So you said something very interesting. So you call it targeted applications, right? So that's what Hypar is for, really, right? To produce targeted applications in the Hypar ecosystem to tackle particular tasks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How does it then? Okay. Sorry. Go on.
I was gonna like share a screen here a little bit.
Sure.
Talk a little bit over some of the stuff we're working on. Here, let me see if this works. Let's do that. And then I can see you at the same time. So we've been working on a project here.
So for those who will be watching on YouTube, there is Anthony just sharing screen showing some cool stuff there.
Yeah. So we're working on a new application on top of the Hypar platform around space planning. And in contrast to kind of a very kind of busy, UI you see in the public version of Hypar right now, we've been looking at, really simplifying this kind of interaction so that you can do, very simple, straightforward space planning tasks, but still get the benefit of some things running in the background to start helping you as you, work on these tasks, right? And so, let's say I need a classroom, and we convert this guy in there, and now we've got this kind of seating. But, we also want, maybe we want our open office back, and let's bring him over here. And, maybe we need a couple of meters of corridor in between, And so, this is something, that we'd look at as this is sort of a targeted application that is around space planning. Now, could somebody add to this a targeted application that does all the air supply to these rooms? Certainly, it's something we're thinking about, right? So if you had, something you have this in a larger context, perhaps, with there's a building and, it's got a few floors, et cetera. This is kind of the environment in which you start to think about, well, what about the building systems? What about the facade? This is still behind the scenes. It's what we've been testing a lot with customers right now to see, is it, suitable for the kind of tasks that they do all the time? And this changes weekly to become more suited to that task. And so, we're a small company, but I also say that, no matter how big your company, there are so many building problems to address, that I don't care how many thousands of engineers you have, you could capture a tiny slice of all the problems that people would like to address, from laying out studs to optimizing wallboard to picking the right window for your climate. It just goes on and on and on the problems that people have, which are mostly solved by people's brains right now, and the experience they have over decades, right? And so, you talked about early on, you were talking about how people start getting involved in an endeavor and then, they sort of get sucked in. We work a lot with healthcare planners, and we did profiles on what is a typical healthcare planner like. And you can see in their career that after they've been in healthcare planning for like 2.5 years, 2.5 to 4, they're in it for life. There's so much information is in their heads now. They become super valuable to address problems like this in their sector. And the question is, can we embed enough expertise in our software so that an architect, a MEP designer, somebody who has less experience in the sector can come up with successfully? In a much shorter amount of time. Can we shorten that ramp up of somebody to a new sector and being able to meaningfully contribute without having 3 projects under their belt?
I remember from my early years of structural engineering, when we were given software, it was very good software, Autodesk software for structural analysis. We were learning a lot in terms of structural analysis, theoretical structural analysis, based on the features the software had implemented, right? Because we didn't know what we don't know. So it turned out, you can actually calculate this, actually calculate that. It's not that difficult. So that was brilliant, actually. And that would be great to have more software like that, so that allows more junior staff to actually design more complicated things or learn from these features, I think.
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is like one of my kind of personal hobby horses, I guess, about this stuff, which is, when you first, I started life as an architect, and when you first get into the profession, you realize that people will call you a mature architect 20 years from your start. And mature in this case means that some people will trust you with some decisions sometimes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I heard early on in my time at Autodesk, I sat on a panel with a bunch of senior architects, and they were talking about the effects of BIM in their firms. And beyond, my sort of raving about coordinated construction documents, one of the interesting things one of the architects said was, we see when our youngest interns start using 3D, that they more rapidly come to an understanding of those kind of environments that we would have expected them to get to in 5 years, and now they get there in about 2. And they recounted like one anecdote of one of the young architects going out in a field inspection, kind of looking around and saying, that vent's in the wrong place. Because she knew that when a certain lattice work was in place, ceiling, that she shouldn't be able to see that vent. And the 3D environment had made it very easy for her to have a model in her head about how the space was supposed to look and to be able to pick out one service that had been misplaced. And so some of the things we're hoping for too is that if we and others who use the platform can embed enough expertise that we can shorten the learning curve of professionals, because they can see what is correct from a default standpoint.
Yes.
And then alter from there to get to what they actually need with a reasonable safety net. We did some work with DPR construction, and they have a guy, senior guy who has been figuring out how to optimize wallboard in the field for 30 years, right? So he's very good at it. He's one person. He can't be on every project. And everybody had this notion that he might want to retire someday.
Yeah, probably.
And so they asked, can you take this guy's expertise and put it in a piece of software that we can hand to our younger project managers so that they at least have the safety net to begin with, that, if this one guy were doing it, he would probably do it like this. Right. And then you can make your own decisions in the field after understanding what this approach would look like. Right. So we think there's an opportunity for the industry, rather than using its frankly master apprenticeship system to pass along building knowledge, to actually start recording it in an automated way so that other people can come along and use it and build further without having to recapitulate the education. And so, something that produces, automatically, layouts of different apartments.
Are you using any large language models to do that, or some artificial intelligence kind?
So yes, but to do that is a deeper question. So, if you dig around in Hypar, as it is today, and open up the workflow panel, you will find a gazillion little programs here that are all contributing something into the model, right? All of these things, one way or another, have some kind of inputs in them, right? Depth at ends, we can go on, right? There's all kinds of different things that you could say. How do you want your structure to be? Blah, 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 blah. Right? What we did, there is a natural language interface on top of this where you get to type these things with like a 5-story, and, I can change it. Let's close some panels so we can actually see what we're doing here. And if I change this, maybe to a 3-story, a 3-story U-shaped building, right? What we're doing here is we're taking the natural language typed into that box, and we are mapping it using a large language model down into the inputs that I just showed you to begin with, right? So this is a real model. You can export this down into Revit. It becomes the things that you would expect in there, and you can move on to your documentation. What we're doing is, and this is also about kind of lowering that knowledge acquisition curve, is giving somebody a way to describe the building and get something within certain parameters. As I said when we released this last year, you're certainly welcome to type in, I would like a museum in the style of Zaha Hadid, and you will not get that. You will get some version of what you're looking at here, right? Yeah. So, you do profound changes like, let's say we want an H-shaped building instead, and let that, but these are all procedural underneath. So we're not one of those places that says, hey, everything is AI and AI is going to solve everything. Like, we think AI is one computational technique that's very interesting in certain applications. But we also think that procedural approaches are fine. And so we have folks who come to us and say, hey, can you use AI to do something, right? I have all this data, right? And we usually say, all right, well, first, there's no guarantee that your data is normalized. And that's 80% of the time that data scientists spend is grooming their data for some automated process. So get ready if you really want to go here. But if we do that, the next step is going to be, we are going to try to infer why you did things from the artifacts that you produced, accurately or not. And then there's going to be a piece of software that's going to try to use those inferences to make a result. And then we say, or you could just tell us why you did that and what procedure you followed, and we could write it down. So there's this, I was just talking to one group about this, and I was like, if you know how it's done, write it down. If you suspect there might be patterns in data that you have that you can't find, think about AI, right? I think there could be some super interesting stuff coming out of companies that are ingesting enormous amounts of building data if they can properly normalize it and everything. I wish them and hope very much that they can do something super, super interesting. I don't think it makes all other types of computation obsolete. I don't think it makes the human gesture obsolete. I think all these things mesh together, right, to become the total system. And the total system has human agents, and it has automated agents, and it has AI agents. And like a project where we have expertise and different types of expertise from all these different firms that all come together, like every one of these things can benefit from all these different techniques applied in a useful way. And what I'm always looking at is, has somebody found a way to take one of these techniques, whether it's machine learning or large language models, procedural, blah, 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 and found a really good way to apply it? And then, of course, if I do, then my next call is, hey, how'd you like to bring that to Hypar?
Yeah. All right. Anthony, thank you. We are running out of time, but I really want to ask these few questions. So we have one question from our LinkedIn pool. And the question is, how does Hypar ensure accuracy and reliability when converting text descriptions into BIM models? How do you relate to that?
Hypar is not your architect. So, look, every piece of software that enters a professional market has a disclaimer in its license that says basically nothing gives you the excuse to not think. Right? So, how do you guarantee accuracy? Well, it is in fact an exercise for the professional to decide whether something is accurate in the right way. Now, can we ensure that if you type in 5 stories, you'll get a 5-story building? Sure. Is it the right 5-story building? There's no way any piece of software can judge that for you. Because every project has its own value system that it brings.
Of course.
Right? And the job of the professionals is to translate the value system of, we're trying to put up the cheapest building possible. We're trying to put up an icon of, corporate success. We're trying to do a hospital that will serve 150 patients in an underserved area. These are all value systems, and only people can translate those value systems in the result. Mm-hmm. So is it accuracy or serving the purpose? And only people are going to decide whether something is properly serving a purpose or not. So, will it be accurate? Yeah.
If the question is if I put 4 meters, it's going to show 4 meters on the model, then I guess the answer is 100% yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. If I put in, give me a good hospital.
Probably not necessarily.
But you'll have to decide whether it's good or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. So I wanted to touch very, very briefly on the fundraising that you recently completed. I think middle of last year. So you raised 5.5 million Series A investment. So how is it going to fuel your company's growth? Where do you want to allocate these funds?
We put a lot of it into even more engineers. It was mostly, there's kind of, as I intimated, there's always an infinite amount of things to do, and you have a finite, set of resources, right? And so some of the money, most of it really gets applied to expanding the team, and just getting in more people, who are not very thick on the ground, generally, who have this intersection of having worked in the building trades and also understand software, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of what we look for on our team. So we have registered architects on our team who also work on the software, PEs. So we have folks who actually understand buildings, and then they work also on software. So a lot of what the money went to was to expand the team.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay. So your investors, brick and mortar ventures and building ventures, how did you pick them? Or is there any advice you could give to someone who is raising money and choosing between different VCs? And what was your approach when talking to different VCs?
I don't think Jesse Devitt of Building Ventures would mind me telling this anecdote. Jesse was the earliest, smallest, and most persistent investor in Flux. And so Flux, has pivoted a bunch of times and is a completely different type of company now. But Jesse lives fairly close to where I live in Massachusetts, so I arranged to take him to lunch. And the first words out of my mouth were, "Hi, Jesse, I don't want your money." And he said, "Good, because I don't want to give you any money." But the question I had for him was, my partner and I think Flux had a really good idea, but they pivoted away from it. Was that because it was a very stupid idea, or because we want to do something very, very similar to what they were intending to do, and we want to know right now if it's stupid? And he said, no, it's a very smart idea. It was a great idea. And then he explained a bunch of background stuff which caused their pivots. And so Building Ventures was just sort of informal advisors to us. We would call them and ask them questions because they have a vast connections into the industry. And eventually we sat down with a couple of the partners, including Jesse, at an Autodesk University, in fact, and we said, okay, now we want your money. and they were interested. So, look, we're kind of odd people to ask for this kind of advice because, unlike a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm in my late 50s now, and we started this like 5 years ago. Ian's in his mid 40s. A lot of people, do startups in their 20s, So, but I would say, talk a lot to your target constituency. Just ask them more and more questions, and don't invest heavily in something you're unsure of. The first thing you want to do is make the simplest freaking thing you can, even if it is just an interactive PowerPoint presentation to hand to a prospect, someone you think is going to be your future customer, and see if they like it. Just
that's a very good advice.
Minimize investment. Like I used to have a lecture that I would give at Autodesk where I would say software development, this is what I'd say to the product managers. Software development is your absolutely last resort to solve any problem, because it is the most expensive and error-prone thing you can possibly do. So, try things like, can you just document something better? Like, can you find some other way to do something that somebody wants to do with your software? But I had a whole list of like 10 tactics to try before you finally throw up your hands and say, oh God, we're going to have to build some software. So take that attitude. Like, yeah, of course, you're a software company. It's great. You're going to make software. Figure out what is the thing that the software is going to do that nothing else will actually do for that target user.
Brilliant. Brilliant, Anthony. Thank you very much. I learned a ton about Hypar and also design broadly. So tell us, as a last question, closing question, a wrapping question, tell us where people can find out more about you and Hypar.
So our website is hypar.io. You can reach me at, surprisingly, Anthony at hypar.io. I do actually hang around on LinkedIn, enough to matter. So, you can always reach me, find Anthony Hauck on there. I have no special thing. It's just Anthony Hauck. And drop me a line. We've had a lot of, good business relationships just develop out of a cold contact, on LinkedIn too. We're probably going to be updating our website, again, this year at some point. So that'll get refreshed. But yeah, we've got a ton of information up on Hypar.io about what we do. And if you're, if you're one of the more technically inclined people, we get a lot of compliments on our thorough documentation of our open source data model and how the platform works. So, dig in there and have fun.
All right. Anthony, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much. Great talking with you.
Thank you.